Hello and welcome to Walking with the Warrior, serving those who serve in military contexts. I'm Stephanie McHugh, and I'm an adjunct professor of counselor education at California University of Pennsylvania. I'm also a veteran school counselor. I currently practice in Bell Vernon Area School District, and I'm a member of the Board for Stars in Schools, a program we'll talk about in just a few moments. Thank you for joining us today. Our agenda is to talk about recognizing the need, an overview of Military Culture 101, and asking that important question whether this is relevant in your school. We'll talk a little bit about responding to the need, and I'll unpack some strategies and resources that might be helpful to you, and hopefully we have some time for Q&A. So let's talk about recognizing the need. Is this relevant in your school setting? Well, I can share with you some stories from the trenches. Former students of mine who offered some presenting clues that something was wrong, and it ended up having to do with a military concern. Miranda is the mother of James. James was an elementary student who was the star of the class, front row, answered questions, the picture of the perfect student. And all of a sudden, we started to see some behavior changes. He was angry, he was disengaged from his schoolwork, and attendance started to become a problem. After reaching out to Miranda, we realized that her husband, Chris, was deployed. He was a fighter pilot for the Air Force, and James was really having a lot of difficulty being, quote, the man of the house, and was struggling in school as a result. Bailey is a high school story. Bailey was being raised by his grandfather. Both parents were deceased, both parents military. One in active duty was killed in combat, and his other parent came home from a deployment with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD, was medicated and became addicted to medication and overdosed. Bailey also presented as an attendance issue in school, even though he really liked hands-on classes like engineering and what we used to call shop classes. He was missing a lot of school. And as it turned out, Bailey's grandfather, who was raising him, had developed cancer. Bailey was afraid to come to school because he was so concerned and scared that he would come home from school and find he was all alone in the world. So these were presenting clues of students who were in the school setting who were very close-lipped about their military ties and how additional supports might have been helpful to them. My story is not quite so sad. My father was in Korea. He was a navigator for the Air Force. And when he came back from his deployment, he went into education. He actually passed away when I was quite young. I was 8 years old when he died. And I guess my affiliation with folks in the military and my work in helping support those from military contexts is a bit of an homage to my dad. My friend Dawn is in about the center of the screen there. You can see him. That's Dr. Dawn Accomando. He is Director of Veterans Affairs for Duquesne University. He also was in the Air Force, like my dad. If Dawn were with us, he would be giving you a multi-generational perspective on what deployment is like. Dawn's story involves a few deployments where he had a very young family, infant daughters, that he had to leave for deployment, came back and really tried to step back into his family after missing important milestones like walking and talking. He also tells the story of his mother, who at one point had 3 sons who were all deployed. And like an Italian mother, she was very tough. She never actually asked the boys what it was like for them, and they didn't ask her what it was like for her. She's not with us now, and that leaves Dawn sort of scratching his head, wondering what that must have been like for her. Paul is in the bottom left corner. He currently has a young family, but at the time of his deployment through the Army, he hadn't yet met his wife or had his daughters. He still to this day, though, suffers from PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. He is currently a practicing counselor doing a lot of work with veterans and those in the military, as well as other populations. But he does still have to explain to his young daughters when daddy's having a bad day, or when he struggles even driving through an intersection when he has flashbacks to his deployments. And then probably my favorite picture is the one in the top left. That's Connor and Bradley. Bradley is the canine in the picture. Connor is a student at Duquesne. He's just about to finish his education degree, and his connection is through Dr. Accomando as Director of Veterans Affairs. Connor was really having a struggle, a very tough time engaging with students on the campus who were maybe a little more worried about partying than they were about classes. And he found himself pretty danger close when he crossed paths with Dr. Accomando. Through Dawn's intervention, Bradley and Connor got to meet. Bradley is a service dog, and because Connor's injuries include traumatic brain injury that leads to a seizure disorder, Bradley can be very, very helpful to him in sensing when a seizure might be coming on, helping Connor calm down, helping him with his medication. And as you can see, those two are the best of friends. It's no small worry thinking about veterans and folks in military culture who are danger close. Suicide and the military veteran population go hand in hand. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention estimates 123 Americans commit suicide each day. The Veterans Affairs Administration estimates between 20 to 22 American vets commit suicide each day. That conservative estimate is that 22 suicides per day in America are veterans. That's almost 20% of all suicides coming from 1% of the population. And that's actually a conservative estimate. There are certain states like Texas and California who are not required to report their statistics. And you have to realize that American vets don't include those who were dishonorably discharged. So the rate of suicide may actually be higher than we know. If you have a chance, check out Project 22 if you'd like to learn a little bit more about this vulnerable population and their danger of suicide. Let's circle back, though, to what it looks like in schools for our students. You already pieced together from some of the stories from the trenches that I just told you that there are academic flags with our students. You might see a drop in grades, a failure to complete work, especially homework. Think about how the home environment may have changed with the deployment and how important homework really becomes when the family dynamic is changing so radically at home. You may also see some disengagement in the classroom as well. When somebody's worried about mom or dad and whether he or she will come home, it's really hard to focus on a history lesson or a math problem. You might also see some social emotional flags as well. Changes in behavior, an increase in discipline referrals, disengagement with friends, clubs, and sports, and an over-engagement with adults. A lot of these students will feel that their friends are really worried about trivial things and they can't relate. And they'll over-engage with adults because they feel like they have a lot on their plate like adults do, and maybe only adults understand them. You may also see some attendance issues as well. Let's face it, deployment looks a lot like grief. There's shock and denial, avoidance, confusion, fear, numbness, and blame. There can be anger, frustration, anxiety, irritation, embarrassment, and shame. And there can be depression and detachment, a feeling of being overwhelmed, a lack of energy, and a helplessness. The stages of grief that are on the right side of the screen, frankly, if you can get students to that side, that's a win. If you can get them to struggle to find meaning, feel the desire to tell their story or to reach out to others, or if you even get them through intervention to explore their options, develop a new plan, and feel empowered, secure, a sense of self-esteem and meaning, that's good news. It's very, very difficult, though, for students who struggle with deployment to get to the right side of the screen. And here's why. When we look at an overview of military culture, we realize that these folks are trained to manage situations. They have a lot of trouble asking for help, and they avoid others who have sought help. There's a feeling of contagion and weakness and vulnerability that they're very uncomfortable with. Folks in military culture can be tough. They can use tough, brash language, and obviously physical fitness is a big part of being in the military. So physical toughness is part of the equation too. On the positive, though, they're used to being part of something much bigger than themselves. And when we talk a little bit about the trench mates and the tribe, this will make a little more sense. Remember that it's only 1% of our population who currently serve. During World War II, it was 16% of the population who served. But everyone really was touched by the war. There were victory gardens, Rosie the Riveter went into work, and everyone in some way had a part to play with World War II. But today, only 1% serve, and that sense of connectedness has grown very small. Military and their families are well supported on post, but when they move to civilian life, there's very little support off post unless it's sought. And as you can see from the left side of this screen, they avoid others who seek help, and they have trouble seeking help and support themselves. This pyramid might look familiar if you're familiar with the theoretical work of Maslow. Students who struggle with deployment in our schools are really struggling at the very base level with physiological issues. Who's going to take care of me? Are my parents taken care of? Do I feel safe? Do I feel like my parents are safe? And even those feelings of love and belonging. Sometimes there's a grandparent who's raising kids, and the family dynamic changes in such a way that those feelings of love and belonging become questioned. It's very difficult to get to esteem and self-actualization when the foundation of your pyramid is on rocky ground. So is this relevant in your school? Well, if you're from Southwestern Pennsylvania, we happen to be the third largest military and veteran community in the nation. Florida is typically number one with a high percentage of retirees, and the Virginia area is number two. Think about it. When deployment and service ended, a lot of folks came to Pennsylvania for the steel and coal industries. And then when those industries faltered, many folks went into the military for work. Once their deployment was done, they moved back home, and back home meant Pennsylvania. According to my friend Paul Shipley, we always want to remember that the military community is the community forged in fire. Those relationships transcend cultural, educational, and socioeconomic barriers in a way that very few other experiences can. This extends to the families also. Think of a wolf pack. The strongest will defend the weakest just because they are in the pack. So when you think about serving those who serve, is this relevant in your school? Absolutely. So if we know there's a need, what strategies and resources help us respond to the need? Well, the first thing you need to do to respond is to actually engage. Engagement with students and their parents and guardians is key. Support can only come from engagement and especially from building trust. If you can, disclose. It's helpful if you share any military affiliations you may have, even if it's a parent or a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle. Either you served or you have a family member who served. This humanizes you and addresses the curiosity of you asking for follow-up. It's okay to be direct with folks from the military. They're accustomed to taking orders and they will follow up. If you're interested in counseling theory that might work well for intervention, Gestalt and other systems theories work well. Choice or reality theory is very concrete and direct. People in military culture respond very positively to this theory. Behavior theory, also very effective because it's concrete. And solution-focused brief theory, very positive and solution-focused, very effective. Some less effective theories include person-centered, psychoanalytic theory, and existentialism. So how do you continue to intervene and engage? Well, ask questions. I see you served or are serving in the military. Is it okay if I ask a few simple questions? Get permission. Very easy questions to lob over the fence. Which branch did you serve in? Why that branch? Oftentimes there's a family connection. How long did you serve? Would you feel comfortable sharing what your specialization or special job was? Very safe questions to ask. If you feel that the student or the service member is opening up, ask more questions. Did you deploy? If so, where? Where have you lived before this? What was the most memorable part of your service? Where was your favorite place to live? Be on the alert for a response to any delicate or awkward questions. People in military culture don't normally open up to strangers, so make sure the person is comfortable with the questions you ask. Some questions are simply off limits. Hey, did you ever kill anyone? Totally off limits. Oftentimes younger students will ask this question, and it can be very difficult to navigate. Let's face it, we live in a video game culture, and with Call of Duty and Fortnite and other games, there's a bit of a numbness that gets built up, and students struggle to empathize with the fact that this is a difficult question for someone to respond to or address. Thank you for your service ends the conversation. And I'm very guilty of this. I thought I was doing a good thing, expressing my gratitude. But I realized that most of the time when I said thank you for your service, I usually followed it up with, so anyway, and I moved the conversation in another direction. Really, the goal is to open up the conversation, to ask questions, to let people tell their stories. You also don't want to ask, what do you need or how can I help? Remember, these are awkward questions because people in military culture don't want to be perceived as needy or that they're vulnerable and need help. So be careful how you phrase these questions. It's best to be a little vulnerable. It's okay to say, I don't know what I don't know, or what can I do? See the difference with what can I do? It's very action oriented. You're basically saying, hey, I'm on your team. Put me in, coach. As opposed to, what do you need? It's, what can I do? Remember, only 1% serve, and the rest of us are often misinformed or underinformed. Being vulnerable opens up a window where the student can help you, and that creates trust. Being able to find those who may be in need is really the biggest trick. Capturing military-related contextual data for your students can help you be on the alert and sensitive when any needs arise. You can do this in school registration. That typically happens in kindergarten. But remember, folks from military culture who have had deployments may have moved around a bit. PIMS reporting vehicles. Now in Pennsylvania, we call it PIMS, but every state has this type of reporting vehicle. It's basically to ensure that no child gets left behind. A lot of times in our student information systems, or our SIS, there are ways of flagging students who may be part of a special population. Being the child of someone who is deployed or could be deployed puts the student in a special population category, and there are ways to flag these students in your system. You may also consider emergency contact cards. Schools are really diligent about getting these filled out every single year because, let's face it, custody changes, address changes, phone numbers and emails change. There are all kinds of changes to emergency contacts, so we have to collect these cards each year. It's a very simple thing to just flag the cards for the students who you think might be in the most need. What else can you do? Be proactive. Identify students who may have military ties. Work with your administration to include them in the messaging. Make them the bridge and build a bridge. Encourage students to share their struggles, stories, and experiences. You also want to create safe space within your school too, so students feel comfortable self-identifying. Veterans appreciation programs for veteran employees and family members, great idea. Show and tell. Obviously, in November, a lot of veterans are invited into schools to tell their stories, but you don't have to wait for November. If there's a connection between someone who does drone programming in the military and the drone programming you're doing in computer class or in physics class, bring a vet in, ask them to tell their story. Invite vets into the school. Do send deployed pictures, honor walls, and other physical reminders that your school is a safe space for self-identification. Here are some resources for your bookshelf. Once a Warrior, Wired for Life. Don Accomando highly recommends this. It talks about differing needs in military culture, and this book nails it. It's the perfect desktop aid. In addition, Ed.D's Warrior's Return contains ideas for connecting and building trust, another great guide and desktop aid. I'm a big fan of Tribe by Sebastian Junger. We have a strong instinct to belong to small groups defined by clear purpose and understanding. Tribes. We have seen this in our culture for hundreds of years. We are a communal species. And Sebastian Junger talks a lot about military and how after deployment, the struggle isn't so much the PTSD and the traumatic brain injuries and other physical injuries. It's the societal injury of coming back, looking for a quest for meaning, and feeling better in wartime than you do in peace. Tribe explains why we're stronger when we all come together and how that can be achieved even in today's divided world. Highly recommend this book. Great resource for elementary students is Santa's Dog. This book unpacks for young learners what it must be like around the holidays when somebody from your family is missing. Not because they're missing, they're deployed, and how family dynamics might change around a special time like Christmas. Give it a read if you work with young populations. Additional tools for your toolbox can be found in the Stars in Schools website. I work on this with my dear friend Kathy Luke, who began the Stars in Schools program, Standing Together for America's Reservists. On this website, you'll find easy to navigate resources for parents, for students, and for educators. A wealth of information, including a very lengthy reading list, appears on this website. Check it out. In addition, I always like to recommend Military Teen Chat. Remember that tribe mentality and connecting to somebody who just has a shared experience? Well, that's what this app does. It's an app that military teens can put on their phone, and when they're frustrated with what might seem like trivial issues from their peers, they can connect with somebody who really gets it. I'm a really big fan of this app because there are adults who are gatekeepers with this app, making sure that there aren't any creepy predators who are taking advantage of some of our most vulnerable populations, our military teens. In-person tools for your toolbox exist as well. In my area, over 180 nonprofit supports are in my toolbox. I can access veteran service organizations like the VFW, American Legion, and AMVETS. Maybe they're abundant in your area as well. You could also do a search on the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America in your region. And if you're struggling making a connection, go no further than your local college or university. Often these campuses will have a Student Veterans of America branch or somebody like Dawn Accomando who's in charge of Veterans Affairs, and they can act as a bridge builder to connect you to people who are willing to help. Vet centers or community-based outreach centers also exist, and they can be less intimidating than the VA. Don't be afraid to take advantage of these resources as well. One last thought. Don't overlook vulnerable students whose context in your school is paramilitary or quasi-military. These are students whose parents or guardians are veterans. They might not be deployed, but they still might be struggling with drug issues, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, or other injuries. Also, don't overlook any students whose parents or guardians are in law enforcement. Remember, 70% of law enforcement officers are ex-military. They are just as vulnerable to PTSD. And every time a law enforcement officer is on duty, it's like a mini deployment. Thank you so much for taking time to walk with the warrior today and join me in serving those who serve. If you have questions, be happy to address them or connect you with those who can. You can see my contact information on the screen. In the meantime, take good care. And thank you for your service.